From the belly of the Beast Coast, Glastonbury, Connecticut, this is the Cultra Trail Running Podcast. We talk about all the fun shit that happens on the trails that most normal people don't care about. The language we use is fucking explicit and raw like the trails we run on, so don't listen with your kids! Cultra is brought to you by our Patreons and supporters, and we are 112% listener supported, and support is good.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Cultra Trail Running Podcast. I am your hostess with the mostest for today, Evil Becky Burke, and I will be joined soon by Fred. On the podcast, we talk about all the fun and crazy shit that happens on the trails and in our lives that most normal people don't care about or won't talk about. And today, I'm introducing one of our favoriteest people, Ian Golden.
Yeah, it's good to, Becky. Yeah, it's been a while. And to be fair at the outset here with the coaching topic, while I'm still somewhat informally kind of coaching some athletes, and I still put on some workout sessions and a summer training camp, mostly for high schoolers. I'm not actually formally coaching a season at the moment. So just to preface that, and in case it makes a difference to your kind of how it stays on the rails or off the rails. But it is good to connect with you again. It's been a while, and if Fred pops up here, it'll be good to hear from Fred as well. But yeah, thanks for reaching out again.
Oh, you're welcome. So yes, so as Ian mentioned, that what I had thought a good conversation topic today would be about was high school running and running in youth. And the parallels between that and running as adults and going into to the eventually getting into that ultra atmosphere. This is the time of year that anybody who has was kids or as a coach knows, like this is the big part of the season. This is when the championship races are coming up. This is when you're all your hard work is kind of coming together. And I think that's similar for, marathon runners and ultra runners and just other runners in general. The fall is a really big time, especially right now. There's a lot of big races that are happening in big events that people are training for. So, I thought it would be neat to have you on because I feel like you wear so many different hats. And I wanted to kind of hear from you in regards to those different hats. So can can you tell us about your background with running briefly and and for those who don't know that have lived under a rock, and how you got into coaching in general, be it, I think you have quite an array of coaching backgrounds. So
Yeah, and I think that I, in some ways, maybe envy the people that are living under a rock these days. I think, right, there's so much heaviness and weight and just kind of yuck in the world. And I think some of that tied into where I was coaching in terms of some of the politics that entered in and why I'm not kind of coaching at the moment in a formal capacity. But I don't know, under the rock's not necessarily a bad place to be, I think, at the moment. If you could just kind of live there for a while and maybe roll back that rock. I don't know, maybe a few years from now, kind of like the groundhog and see whether it's kind of clear. And if it's not, maybe just kind of tuck back under that rock for maybe another couple years and just kind of keep going like that. But yeah, I running for sure has become I guess, athletics community angle. They've all become, and I guess intentional about having them become or pursuing them as um, my focal points in life, I guess. Beyond being a professional runner without being good enough to be a professional runner. So I grew up a swimmer. I think I swam competitively from maybe, I don't know, at ages of 4 to 16, I think a couple seasons a year. And
that's
everybody
awesome.
grew, and I was still that kind of runt kid, and my high school didn't have a team. And so I switched into running, and that just became, I think, the focus from there. Ran in high school. I grew up in Pennsylvania. If there's any PA listeners, I was a District 3 program in about an hour northwest of Philly, kind of in Amish country area, relatively speaking. We were even forget what level it was, but it wasn't the biggest school level. It was kind of the next tier down. But we had a good program. We were, uh, as a team, state champions my sophomore year and my senior year. I think we were second or third, maybe my junior year. And it was great. Like I think a lot of cross country programs. I was just down at the Manhattan Invite a couple weeks ago
Mhm.
and watching. They didn't necessarily have like an award ceremony, but the winning teams were getting up on stage, and we were waiting for our girls JV team who won the JV race for their wave to get up. And there was a West Virginia boys school that was up on the stage, and there ends up being just kind of one that ends up being the spokesperson for the team in the moment. And he just kind of rambled on in a very impassioned, kind of fun, youthful way about, what makes them great or where their focus is. They're the closest team like in the country. Like there's no team that are
Mhm.
closer or tighter bond than them, and they spend the time in classes together and
Oh.
hours in practice and meets. And I think you can, I think fortunately say the same about many teams in sports. But in my experience, the culture with running, and particularly distance running, has its own unique feel. And I think often say that cross country maybe gets its fair share of kind of the brains and the geeks and, maybe those that, aren't, I don't know, coordinated enough to play other sports or aren't aggressive enough to play other sports or whatever. And so I think what you end up with is generally a pretty nice group of kids with pretty strong relationships and families around them. And it's less cutthroat than I've seen other sports be. Um, and it's just a really, I think, supportive environment. And so I think a lot of sports, teammates get really close, and cross country is, one of those where you're really, really close with your teammates, and it's a lot of shared joy or suffering or just time together, and it's cool. So that became a huge part of my experience and my community and friend sets and families and family friends. And so ran through high school. Wasn't going to run after high school, but decided
Mhm.
to very last minute, and I ran for Ithaca College for a D3 program, and also had a pretty good experience. And I did decently well. I was a All-American my sophomore year,
That's
my junior year,
awesome.
and my senior year in cross country, and I was first alternate for track and steeplechase. And so I did well, but I think the kind of in some ways the better you are to a certain extent, the more aware
Mhm.
of just how much how good you aren't, almost like how much better those others
Right.
are. And
Yeah.
so, right. So while I did okay for D3, like it was a world of
You
difference
always
from,
compare yourself
oh yeah,
to, yeah, that there's always someone else to compare and then another group of, yeah.
yeah, right. So, you know, but it ended up being a really good and fun experience, and we hit a lot of trails in college. I don't think that was always necessarily the best for our training, but we really enjoyed it, and that became part of my experience as well. And I coached I think first year out of college, I coached a high school team out in Lake Washington, east of Seattle. And then I was that was just a cross country season. And then I was volunteer assistant for the University of Hawaii for maybe a year or so with their cross country and track programs for the women. And then,
And
yeah, go ahead.
so what is like what would you say your coaching philosophy is when it comes to coaching younger individuals like that high school or even college age? Um, are there
Yeah,
certain
so now
things
push it.
that you follow more or believe in?
Yeah, and sorry if I was just rambling there and trying to,
No.
take it back. So I guess that's, maybe changed. So now that I'm pushing 50 or I'm 48 now, these past 3 years where I was coaching, 2 years up at Ithaca College as a volunteer or assistant and a full year with Ithaca High School, I think I was able to draw on a lot of just what running has been for me. And so that just plays into the philosophy of trying to look into the greater picture and
Mhm.
for each athlete it potentially means something different for them and so you're really coming in and working trying to work with each kid where they are, and I think the meaning is going to be different. So I don't know if my there may be some programs or coaches where maybe this is a definitive philosophy and either you kind of you make the cut or you don't, or maybe they work with varsity or and then they have assistants with whatever. But I don't know if I had necessarily, maybe if I took a couple days to chew on it, I could generate something, but I don't know if I had a cut and dry philosophy. I think I was really trying to um, yes, have all runners improve, but I think it was really um, coming at it in what it means for them and what improvement or what enjoyment in running looks like to try to be sure that they're not just competitive, but also kind of healthy for a life of running.
I think that I love hearing that. I think that that's great. And um, I've talked forever about how I can't wait to coach at the high school level. And I coached adults a long time ago for like 10 years. I coached marathoners and then had my boys, and my work just hasn't allowed for me to be able to coach at a high school level quite yet. But I think you bring up such a good point in that. I think that's so important is that each each person, each individual on the team, like their goals are going to be different, and you're also setting like this foundation for them, um and it, you know wanting to make it to meet whatever their personal goals are. And so I know that for some kids, just thinking about the teams that I've helped out on, and even my own kids' teams, some kids are there for the friendships, some kids are there to, get, you know, to get better for baseball season. Some are there, because they're super competitive. Some are there because they just like the idea of, running, but don't maybe like racing. And and I do think that I think that's nice to hear as a parent that I think that's a great philosophy. Even if you didn't realize it was a philosophy. So what was I just gonna ask you? So how do you with high school athletes, how do you balance developing their endurance with their speed? Um, and of course their endurance, it's typically a 5K. So for me, that feels like a sprint. Um, but it's not, especially at the at high school level. But get building up that speed for them, but building up that endurance. Like, how do you?
Yeah. Um, so I guess there too, you'd look at it. I guess there's a lot of common framework for maybe how I was coaching, or I guess still coaching athletes. There are certain concepts that convey, and maybe ratios of workouts per maybe like weekly volume would change, or maybe certain time structures would change. But I guess certain, concepts convey. And so for me, in the that full year that I coached 3 seasons for Ithaca High School a year or so ago, I had a wide range of athletes. I had one kid who was coming in running for the first time as a senior, and I think the first day of practice, he I think came up to me in cross country and just introduced himself and just I forget what he said, but he yeah, I don't know how he introduced himself. I don't remember that part, but the takeaway was that he hadn't really run much prior or over the summer. And I think when I asked, how much he had been running, he's like, well, I haven't really been running, but I've been doing a lot of walking. And so there you'd have like uh, at one level, a baseline of experience or capacity that you're building up from zero basically. And then I had another kid, or another, let's see, my top boy. Um, he ended up being in indoor, was the New York State champion, and because a lot of Western programs don't have indoor, he was had one of the fastest 3,200 indoor performances in the country that year. I think maybe he was ranked third in the U.S. or something like that.
Wow.
And then my top girl was also one of the fastest distance runners in the country. And so there's this wide range
Yeah.
of abilities, but I think the framework is still somewhat similar, just at different ratios. And so, there is the cardiopulmonary endurance piece, and then there is the speed development piece. And for at least for me in my experience, I've always been one where I'd like to see and somewhat rely on the data. And I kind of wanted to know, what the intention of certain workouts are and why we're doing certain things. And so for me in college, Ithaca College, I ended up having a kind of a fallout with my coach, where he was a pretty good runner, D3 program in college. Went to North Central, and they were kind of have always been a legacy powerhouse program. He had always just kind of done very traditional workouts. He was
Mm.
very adept at running through pain. He was running his senior year with multiple stretch fractures in his back. And he was actually having
Wow.
to use like a horse tranquilizer before
Oh my
injection
gosh.
form, like before races, just to be like functional for these races. And so, you can imagine the mindset of that
Yeah.
individual, right? And what they're
Hmm.
putting themselves through, but also how they're going to view potentially training, or how they deal or have a difficult time maybe relating with injury. Um,
Yeah.
and so for me, I felt like we were just kind of doing the things maybe they had always done, but I wanted to know why. And for me, we also had at the time Jack Daniels, kind of a legendary coach, and who became a
Love
friend,
Jack
and
Daniels.
yeah, and he was a
I've
friend up until
he
yeah.
done his
So,
trainings.
yeah.
Did his certification class.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so he and I and his wife Nancy kind of stayed in contact. They came out to a few of
That's
my
awesome.
workouts this past year. She just kind of came into my store last week just to hang for a bit. She's still processing him passing and kind of where she's at in life in this point. And but so he was, I think, pretty known even at that point in creating kind of a legacy program out of Portland State,
Mm.
particularly with the women's program.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, he was laying out there this very scientific framework. He was a really good
Mm.
scientist and exercise physiologist, and it conveyed into what most probably runners are using now in some way, shape, or form. For the
Yep.
workouts that I still tailor for athletes, I'm very much kind of using the V dot tables, and not everybody will uh, kind of follow a certain um, consistent kind of line on those tables. Someone might be wired more toward the 800, somebody may be wired maybe toward a
Mm.
half marathon or whatever it is, but there's still, I think, a lot of useful validity in those tables and frameworks. And so I think at the time, as an athlete, I was craving more of that. I wanted to know why. And so I think that kind of persisted into my own training in terms of how I'm working with athletes. For me, and over the years, I was typically not running with a watch. I wasn't keeping any logs, whatever. That was just, I
Mhm.
just wanted to go out and just run and not think about it. But for instance, now I think I've been more consistent running now the past 9 or 10 years than I have been in years. And I am looking at the data, and I'm looking at the zones, and I'm looking at the various metrics and targets, and all those things. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. But that's the stuff that I think I was using with athletes. And so, if it comes to maybe cardiopulmonary endurance, maybe it's a combination of rep workouts or interval work or threshold work or tempo work, these kind of zones that have at least associated value for a lot of people now. That's become
And
commonplace.
do you
Um,
feel like do you feel like when using all of that as you're coaching teens, how much of that do you kind of explain to them or go through with them, or is it more like I'm going to give you these? This is probably the right way to say it, but is there at that age, do you feel like it's important or necessary for you to be explaining to them, like, here's what this formula is, here's why it is, here's the workout we're doing, getting into the all that nitty gritty of what it is that you're doing and why? Or do you feel like it's
Yeah.
kind of a balance depending on the individual and where they're at?
Yes, I think the answer would be yes. Yes to kids are at different spots. Some kids' eyes will just glaze over when you talk about some of that stuff, but many, I think, at some level will soak it up. And if you're using it week over week, they begin to get it and process it. And I feel like it's allowing them, and they can use it for what they will afterward, but allows them to be kind of students of the sport as well. And
Mm,
so several of the athletes that I coach are now with D1 programs. Some are still like in the program, and there's a couple D3 athletes, and it's kind of a mix. But you know, and some aren't running after high school, but those that do, when they're going to different programs, I think that it's helpful to, uh, I think, have an understanding of those concepts. I think so, and I'm still close with a bunch of them. So two of them were home a couple weeks ago, and so there was a big group of us that just went for our Sunday run, long run, and it was two of them back from their Division One programs. They're racing pretty well, pretty fit, and then it was maybe six of the current high schoolers and a couple others, and one of the so for instance. I guess one of the repeated workouts, I guess, that I was using in cross country, and then some into indoor as well, was this concept of um, critical velocity. And so it's something that, with all these, if you go into like letsrun.com and you'd put in like critical velocity and see who's kind of behind it, and you'll have a number of detractors. They'll be like, oh, that's nonsense, whatever. And you're going to find that with probably anything, right? There's going to be people that are
right.
proponents. There's going to be people that think it's just kind of bunk, whatever. But if it makes sense to you and you can be consistent with it, the consistency is key,
Mm,
right? Consistency is the
yeah,
one of the
absolutely.
biggest things, right? It's you could be doing not necessarily good training or intentional training, but as long as you're consistent, and the kids are allowed to grow and still progress and get stronger and whatever, they should improve, even if you're not doing anything too remarkable, as long as they're consistent. But so one of the things that I was doing that ended up working really well was this concept of critical velocity, and it's basically similar to what Daniels would refer to as like cruise intervals, which was
Mm,
a pretty commonly used workout zone and framework, or workout that he'd use with his athletes. And it corresponds to a certain level of max heart rate. But what it's trying to do is basically saying, okay, so a lot of programs in cross country, like a staple workout, let's just say, might be doing 5 by 1K at
mhm,
either current 5K race pace or target 5K race pace, with a certain amount of recovery. And so what critical velocity is trying to do is basically saying, okay, so for that, let's just say it's a VO2 workout,
mhm,
usually associated with like a 5K distance in terms of the stimulus to the body. In that VO2 capacity workout, what can achieve the, I guess, most effective stimulus in that VO2 zone for basically the least amount of work. And so if you're going out and doing a repetitive race pace, yes, you can make the case where a kid's getting maybe hardwired to experience or feel a certain pace and effort, but they're also kind of at their top end, or kind of effort. And yes, you're getting recovery. But what critical velocity is trying to do is say, all right, we're going to try to get as much gain from that zone as we can, but leave you not as beat up the next day. So that consistency is key, right? So I want you to come back the
mhm,
next day and be like, we're good to go again. Like, we don't need necessarily a day off, easy day. The workout didn't take a lot out of us. Like, we're good. And so long as you can do that with regularity and the kids can see the improvement, it doesn't necessarily need to be faster. And so while we were doing that, I was having them do, maybe it's 5 by 7 by K at critical velocity, 2 minutes recoveries in the same grass kind of configuration uh, each week or every 10 days. And throughout the course of the season, they could just feel the difference. They were getting stronger. They could hit targets with a lot less effort. They were felt much more recovered. And so, because I kept the variables the same, they knew intrinsically that they had gotten quicker and stronger. And so, ultimately, what you're after is yes, you want the physical development, but you also want the kind of cognitive belief in themselves and feeling positive,
Mm,
right? Because that's a huge, huge piece is you want to believe in what you're doing. You want to
right.
believe that you've put in the work, but you also want to believe that you can see like tangible results from your training. And so, that was a staple workout that we had done throughout the year and regarding like a specific concept. And that was kind of a cardiopulmonary. And then I also had I view speed development a little bit differently. And so, and then the other workout, and I know I'm kind of a little going off the rails and still kind of just
I find it interesting.
rambling
So,
here, but the other kind of, so what I do the other 2 days, I'd alternate between something with hills in it, grassy hills one week, or tempo work or threshold work. And then it could also even be an easy days. I'd also use speed development in the form of like flying 30s or flying 50s. And so the way I was looking at speed development is you can do a lot of things for speed work. We talk about mechanics and we talk about maybe front end mechanics, and we can do footwork and drill work. And but ultimately, I'm viewing speed as a good chunk being neurologic development. And so, uh, in the form of the flying workouts, they're designed to be all out, short distances, full recovery, and basically you're teaching these athletes or allowing them to experience full on sprinting. And it's different than 200s or 400s or whatever. Like it's literally all out like sprinting. And so the hope is that the body's saying, okay, hey, you're asking me for basically more than I can give you right now. We're going to start making these neurological connections to be recruiting more pathways than we have available right now. And we're going to start adapting to build the neuromotor connections. And so there, if you can do that each week also, they also start to feel it. Maybe there's like 3 or 5 that they're doing in the beginning, and then that state champion runner that I referenced, he really started enjoying those and felt like there were a lot of benefit to him, and we really developed his speed development and capacity, which wasn't as much there uh, maybe to begin with. I mean, it was there, but probably relatively untapped. And he really built up. So by the end of like the indoor season, he was doing like 16 of these flying 30s or 50s and just loved the workout. And so what to bring this back to your original, I think, question, which now that I just rambled for a bit, was I ran with this group when they were back, and he had just referenced he had moved on to this program. He's running for UMass Amherst right now, and he had just mentioned, hey,
awesome.
for yeah, what we're doing now, he's referencing and using that critical velocity zone work for a bunch of his training. So here's a kid that it wasn't on the radar at all before, moved on to this, solid program running at the collegiate
Mm,
level. And he goes in with kind of that knowledge. He knows what the zone's about. He knows what the workouts are. And so, he's got that education, or we kind of equipped him to kind of know.
mm,
And that's one example. And then others are, there's there's a current coach there, which I think is here and there will toss out terms that aren't necessarily reflective of what those terms are, I think, commonly accepted to equate to. And so some of the runners now, because they kind of get it, or if they've been educated, they're like, well, that doesn't necessarily like make
mm,
sense, or you're not necessarily using it like correctly. And it ends up kind of being confusing, but you'd want these athletes ultimately to be able to know what certain terms equate to and then how to use them. So if a coach throws out like, tempo work or threshold or whatever, you have a fairly good sense of what that equates to and what my effort should be. And you kind of know what the workout's about, as opposed to just some random number or saying go out and run hard or whatever. Like, all right, well,
right.
what do you mean by run hard, right? So how do you quantify that? And so it's been good to hear that, the athletes where I have spent time, discussing those concepts workout after workout, they do kind of
Mm,
get it. And now that they move on in life, they're able to
yeah.
use or relate to those concepts.
And so how do you how do you help the athletes who, who are on the team, who love running, um, but probably won't compete at a collegiate level? But how do you work with them to develop a lifetime love of the sport? I'm thinking even of my own coaching when I coached people for marathons, and they knowing that these were people that weren't runners, that got into it. Their goal was to do this marathon, and they're like, I don't think I'm going to do another marathon. And my personal goal for them, and for many of them, it was their goal too, was, okay, maybe I won't go on to do a bunch more marathons, but I want to keep running. I want to keep that in my life. I want to keep that enjoyment of it. So so yeah, so how do you help your athletes who may not be looking to move on to the next level in regards to competition beyond high school, but but who really like it, and building that, like, you know, lifelong love of it, so that in 10 years, you see them running on the side of the road, or you see them at the local 5K or something.
Yeah, I think that's the part of meeting them where they're at, not just necessarily dropping a certain maybe framework over their head that they can't handle or that they feel kind of kicked out the back over. So it's making sure that maybe you can make modifications. So for instance, if, for the athlete that I referenced that hadn't done much running prior, then we're starting with kind of segments and building up. Maybe it's walk to run. Maybe it's just where I'll have one pod head off in a certain direction ahead of a workout and do like 3 miles warm up, but we'll have this athlete just kind of make more of a straight shot. Um, but there's also moments where you really want to try to foster the team being together. And so
I was just
whether
going
it
to ask
be,
about that.
um, yeah, yeah. So whether it be, starting together and then kind of splitting off or coming back together for drills or for warm up stuff or for, um, that type of stuff. You want to make sure that there's that integration there, or maybe it's, you'll do 3 intervals and another athlete will do 5 or 6 or whatever, and making sure that they one feel like yes, they're putting in the work too, just like everybody else. They're doing maybe similar or variations, but you're also making sure that it's something that is yes, challenging them, but something that they can maybe bite off and feel good about. Um, there's I think that kid for that individual athlete, the end of the season race for them going into the conference meet was um, I was just as excited, I think, out there cheering for them being one of the final runners and I think the JV race because I could see how hard they were working and they were closing in on actually like racing like a 5K. I think that they
Yeah,
maybe had run the whole thing. There were parts of the course that I wasn't able to see or get to or whatever. But you could just tell they were really laying it out there and they were competing. And, I tend to try to be really supportive of other athletes from other teams as well. And uh, I will know them by name, or maybe I'll get their name wrong and it'll turn into kind of a running joke where I'll call them a different name or something.
I love
But
that.
for that kid, it was encouraging him and maybe another kid that they were running around to like, work together, run together, kind of form that network of yes, racing, but kind of using and finding the connection with each other out there. And so I'd encourage that in races too. You two, work together or whatever. But then you could see him really, working and laying out there all that he could. And so I, was aware that he was pushing just as hard as anybody else. He's just coming
Yeah.
in from a very different spot. And I was cheering just as loud, if not, louder, for him coming in. And so hopefully they feel that support as well. And hopefully that ends up being a positive and reinforcing thing. And, they can, again, do with it what they want. But I think it's trying to make sure that you're keeping it enjoyable and not just something that's defeating for them or just, not enjoyable. Because really, I would like to see them lifelong.
And do you have any, I think that's all great. And I think that's one of the things that I love about this sport is that, you're, and on some level, you're on the same, everybody's on the same level, so to speak. You're all running this, typically the same distance, the same course, the same, it's just how, how fast you're getting there. and that there's that ability to be able to like to get people to be working out or training with one another, whether they're, a 5 minute miler or a 10 minute miler. Do you have there ever been any like go-to workouts or just go-to activities that you would do with your athletes just to kind of like pull out that, that teamwork and, you know, utilize one person's strengths to help with another person's strengths, that kind of thing?
Hmm. I mean, they were, which I referenced a few minutes ago. I mean, there were common workouts that I did, but the concept of, I guess, using one person's strengths where it may not necessarily be another kid's strengths. I mean, there may be um, the opportunities to pot up. So maybe there's a kid that can back off to try to. Um, I guess bring another runner behind them
Hmm.
along, or maybe there's a kid that you're going to intentionally run a little quicker than the zone would suggest because you kind of want them to be able to latch on in the runners in front. And so for those who are uh, cross country runners, and for those that aren't, cross country is still for sure a team sport, and there's certain targets for maybe you want to get in your top five
Mm.
under a 40-second spread or your top seven within a minute, and it really
Right,
comes
right.
down to some of the ladder runners, and you see certain synergies of athletes working together when they're working together. And so I think that we can encourage that in, like, for instance, workout pods, but at least in the moment talking to you, I'm not sure. I guess I'd have to sit on the concept of um, referencing kind of strengths
I mean,
versus
it
weakness.
sounds like you're you're doing so many of those things. And um uh what advice would you give um to to a parent that, has kids that are running, as far as like what advice would you give to them as to be a supportive parent, to be a, you know, help out their kid as much as they can, or not put any undue pressure on them, or
Yeah, I think just being there, I guess that's for us in life, right? To kind of be present with those around us and trying to, as best as we can, empathize with that individual. It's not, it's trying the best that we can to put our own mental frameworks and paradigms and goals for them. They're all good, and I think it's tough to operate without those. And it's not to say that we should necessarily operate without those, but to be able to kind of set them in their own compartment or silo, set them to the side, and just kind of be there for your kid. Um, one of, for instance, my two older daughters are one's 11th grade, one's ninth grade. They're both running cross country at the moment.
yay.
The 11th, yeah, the 11th grader has had, in some ways, a disappointing last year or so, year and a half or so, where she's just kind of been somewhat plateaued. And some of that may just be physical development. Not uncommon for particularly females to, in
I was just
some
gonna
ways,
ask
take kind
about
of a
that.
right. Yeah, you're right. You grow, you develop. You're suddenly a woman, and you're just, and
Mm.
so the kind of the visual or the visual I put on it or the relation is, you're basically now driving a new race car, like, and it's still a race car or whatever. You have
Oh,
to learn its strengths and weaknesses. You're the same driver and basically just like a new car. So that's to say that, I can relate as a parent where I experience for sure the same challenges, and I don't get it right. And so, always get it right. And I try, but as a parent, I have to work to try to just be there and put my own kind of framework and hopes and things and kind of compartmentalize them. And for me, having coached them for a bit and others, there's certain things that I will see in training that I don't think makes as much sense, and I don't think that it's as good for maybe their physical development or capacity or whatever. And it's hard for me to not, weigh in. I know that
Mhm.
my kid has like one shot at this kind of like at least high school career or whatever. I hope that they're a lifelong runner and there's years and years and decades of running ahead, but at least in the moment, there's kind of like one shot at this, and it's tough for me to not weigh in, but I'm aware that that's often not necessarily helpful. And so I've had to work and continue to try to do a better job of putting my own self aside and just being there. And so maybe there's certain races where she'll, really lay it out there, but still tough. Like there's still maybe certain courses you can compare yourself to prior times and you're running slower than you were last year or the year before or whatever. And they just tried as hard as they could. They really put
Mhm.
it out there, but it just didn't go like they've seen it go before. And so they just need a bit of time to just unload, like let that go and like, I don't know, cry on your shoulder or, or turn to
Mhm.
your in excitement or, whatever. It's just trying to meet them where they are and then doing the best that you can to again put your own junk aside, even if you feel like it's
Yeah.
helpful. And that's hard sometimes.
And what that brings up something too that one of the questions that I had was asking about what were the big differences between coaching boys versus girls in terms of mindset and training. But that also brings up to one of the things that I've just noticed, now just being, from the sidelines and stuff, how the progression that girls make versus the progression that boys make, that it does seem that it's different, and that a lot of that does have to do with girls going through puberty earlier than boys, and and just I don't so I just interested in what you have to say about
Yeah,
all of that.
it still that same concept of each kid. Yes, there's a lot of parallels, but each kid is still coming in with their own set of equations. You see it I'll talk about the physical aspect there in a second, but you see the mental aspect, and you try to understand what will be helpful for each kid. Maybe it's day-to-day training. Maybe it's when they're standing on the starting line ahead of the race and they're just kind of a ball of like anxiety or nerves and how to work with that. Some athletes it may be something that's kind of half deprecating, like joking, because it just kind of takes the edge off and there's just alleviate some of the stress, or maybe they can smile or know that this isn't like a life or death thing, that it's not, there's going to be tomorrow, there's not everything riding on this. um, and it's not something that I've always gotten obviously right as well or along the way, but and you see, I think, situations of parents and their dynamics with kids or home environments, or some of these kids, at least in a good percent of the pod, at least in their team, are kind of high performing, high achieving, supportive
Mhm.
families. Um, that there's a lot of pressure on these kids. They're taking three,
Mhm.
four, five AP courses. They're doing any number of clubs. Their hands are just so full. They're maybe not getting enough sleep. They're whatever. And then you add the layers of pressure, not only from those components, but maybe pressure from parents or pressure for whatever. And that can all kind of manifest on the line in terms of those stresses, and how do you learn to at least try to figure out with that kid how to disarm, I guess, that situation and still feel confident with the race ahead. And then to your point of physical development, yeah, it's hard. And each kid, yes, maybe coming at it at different trajectory, but not infrequently, you'll see maybe males continue to improve at a fairly consistent trajectory. Maybe the girls will develop first, and suddenly they're in that new race car that they still have to learn to drive. It may be a stronger car, a more durable car. It's going to take them further. It's going to be more capable, but it may not be as fast, like right at least in the beginning. And so it's, learning how to navigate that as well. And then there's other variables. So for instance, right before we hopped on tonight for this recording, wife and I went out to particularly to grab some supplements, and so I was talking to one of the coaches who I really respect from a neighboring high school that also has kind of a legacy program, has been doing it for a long time. And he and I were just hanging out, just chatting for a while at the Manhattan races as well. And he also, sees he's just a really genuine individual. And he also, you see kids from other programs and you know who they are and how they're running and how they look. And so he sees that in my own daughters as well. And, how's she doing? And, we talk about that.
Mhm.
And here's to me, oh, so yeah, that's kind of how she looks to me, out there as well. And in this particular instance, it's, well, then we talk about body types or whatever, but he's also, you should get the iron checked, because the reality is
Mm,
you could look at any given starting line and you're not going to necessarily project the winner by, body type. So you can make it work by, and so we did. I got her blood panel, tested the results, just came back and, like yesterday, and the ferritin level was around, it was 15 or 15.7. And so where that falls within kind of the accepted normal range for the general population for a teenage menstruating female athlete,
mm,
it's not enough. And so the target really should be for sure over probably 35. It seems like a more safe target is like 50. And so it's like, hey, this all encompassing? Like this is what's going to make the difference? Well, no, it's a multitude of things that are happening. But here's one piece, like one piece that has a definable metric that we can work on. That it's not your fault. You're out there working just as hard, but hey, like your body maybe needs more iron and
mm,
oxygen transporting capacity in there because you're out there working, but it just can't give you what you're asking for at the moment. And so we'll start into the supplements, see whether it makes a difference. And I don't think she's alone on the team with a lot of kids. And so,
mm,
that's something that where her body wouldn't have necessarily needed that amount, maybe like 2 months ago or two
mm.
years ago, rather, whatever. But suddenly it is calling and could use. And again, is it going to suddenly, go from where they're at now to state champion? No. It's still, again, various things have to come together, but there's one piece that you can hone in on. And so, we can start there. And so that's also learning kids and trying to figure out where they're at, maybe where the hurdles may be or the bottlenecks might be, and then trying to kind of pick those off as you discover them or can work with them.
No, those are great points. And I think one of the things that I had noticed over the years is seeing more, you know, uh, the younger, like, freshman girls that just,
Yeah.
come out flying and really fast freshman year, really fast sophomore year. Whereas and then maybe are more likely to plateau and either, stay where they're at or get a little bit better, but not at
Hmm.
that level that they were. Whereas, I mean, there's certainly not all boys. There's some where I've seen where they started out that same way as freshmen, like really up there, and then kind of plateaued. But I see a bit more of the the steady incline with with boys versus girls, and but I know it happens with both. So what are things that you're able to do or say to kind of help them with, you know, getting, being okay with that and knowing that, every race doesn't have to be a PR, every run doesn't have to be the best run ever. And, keeping that motivation and, you know, not getting down.
Yeah, I think it's at some level, I think you have to, at least for me, I feel like you have to allow some getting down, because it is disappointing. You still have
Mm,
points to compare yourself to. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, again, I
mhm,
mentioned for, most of the past couple decades, I wouldn't wear a watch or keep a log or whatever. I just wanted to go out there and just enjoy running. And that's what was important to me. And I didn't
mhm,
care about the metrics or whatever. But when you're a kind of competitive kid, like the metrics come up, like you're aware, and there's times, and there's it's even more so with this generation, right? That this generation
Right. Yeah.
has, I feel like, a lot more stresses than I would have had, like with my
Yeah, me
generation.
too.
So
Like
much more,
Strava and
right?
you
There's
got
so
your
many
watch
other
that can tell you what you're doing at any moment in time, how fast you're running, you
Totally.
know,
So
all
to
of
your
that.
point or to your comment in the beginning about living under a rock, sure, you could live under a rock and maybe be happy there, but it's also hard to do that. And some of the stuff is fun and it's useful maybe for training or racing. Um and so I think at some level, if you have a kid that's in that spot, one, just acknowledging it,
Mm.
they know that it's real, they know they're experiencing it. And so if you just kind of didn't deal with it as it was and said, don't worry about it. Like not every race has to be like your PR or whatever. Yes, but they're feeling that. They're aware of it. They're
Mm.
upset. They're disappointed. And so I think you also have to allow and empathize for that spot but then be able to keep going from there. Okay, so it was still a great effort, or it's a great finish, or this is where we're at, and this is maybe the phase that you're in life, but this is in if it happens to deal with, for instance, like body type or development or whatever, but long term, you're going to be better for it. You're going to be stronger. You're going to be more durable. Consistency is key, right? If you were some individuals where maybe there's challenges, let's just say with eating or fueling or diet or stress or whatever it is, maybe you can put off some of that a bit, uh, but chances are, it's not going to be sustainable and you're going to break down and you're going to, you know, so a very heavy and kind of complicated topic. But it's trying to at least let them know that I guess you understand, and it's good to be, or it's okay and understandable to be disappointed in it, you know, but it doesn't mean we stop. It means
Mm.
you enjoy running for what it is. You enjoy the team dynamics, the trips, the relationships, the training for what it is, and it doesn't have to be measured to your point in every race has to be a PR or improvement. Hopefully it goes back in that direction. But you got to make sure they're also just enjoying the experience as well, first and foremost.
And two last questions. One is that, you know, I, you sometimes you see these athletes who, you know, compete at this level, and then they maybe, not this pace and whatever, and then they go on to the next level, be it college or professional running or whatever, and they can't quite make that jump. Either they just get riddled with injuries, or they just they just plateau and just kind of go down. Um, and so, what do you think is? I feel like I've seen for some people, it seems like certain kids seem a little bit more likely for that to happen based on the type of training maybe that they have or the type of environment. Um, and so I'm just wondering from you, like, what do you think usually are those things that kind of where that happens, where someone, I'm actually thinking of two runners from Connecticut who graduated probably like 5 years ago, who are phenomenal runners, and they're still good runners, but they went out to off to the best college there, and they just got there, and they just went from being, just whatever crazy runners to just being, injury after injury after
Yeah.
injury, and 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 also just not when they weren't injured, they just couldn't run anywhere near the level that they were running at. And so, what do you think that the I know there's not one particular cause, but what do you think oftentimes is that the cause for something like that to happen?
I think there's probably a bunch of causative factors and antecedents there. So I guess speaking to philosophy as well, when I'm thinking of the long-term runner, there's a number of programs probably everywhere, but New York State included, where there's maybe legacy programs where they had just phenomenal teams year after year and just putting out these kind of high performance individuals. in high school, but very rarely did they ever
Mm.
translate into um, a successful college career that followed. And so when I was, and I bounced this off of a friend and who was a prior Cornell coach, and I think he moved on and he's just working with consulting at the moment. But I bounced off that just that concept of wanting to create a program that wasn't trying to get all that I could out of these kids at the expense of their long-term trajectory.
Mm.
And so even the maybe the top girl on our team who is one of the better runners in the country, even when I communicate with her, it's still yes, I want you to be racing well now, but really the vision is I want you to be still, improving when you're 36, 38. I want you on the
Yeah.
starting line of the Olympic trials or whatever. And so, and that's not to necessarily put pressure there, but it's to say that it shouldn't be the goal of getting everything out of you can right now. It can be, within reason, but within parameters. And so I think, when you look at volume can be different with different individuals. Some bodies may uh, do really well with higher volume. One of the most successful, at least in recent history, with Parker Valby for a
Mm.
female D1 runner, national champion, setting records, whatever, with some injury history, and the where she's kind of settled in, at least I think, at least up
Very
until
low mileage, right?
low mileage, right? Like 25 miles a week,
Yeah.
30 miles a week or whatever, you can still, it shouldn't be that volume is necessarily the prime driver of high
Yeah.
performance for even distance runners. With that said, I think you have a distance runner where the body is able to, in a healthy fashion, absorb, it doesn't necessarily hurt, I think, within reason. But if you're looking at programs, so there was, when we ran in this, second tier size schools when I was in high school. Some of that top tier program, I forget what it was, like AAA, maybe we were double A or whatever they refer to it as.
Mhm.
It would have been like a school like it was like and not what was the name of it? Actually, it doesn't matter, but we're aware that the top programs in the at least in our state at the upper level were out there doing like 70 to 100 miles a week, like as like a high
Mm.
schooler or whatever. And so if you have a program, at least in the short term, that those kids are handling it and handling without injury, chances are that kid might be doing really well, like in high school, that program or whatever. But the chances also are that that kid's going to be pretty cooked by the time you get to like the end of the high school window. And so when I kind of bounced this concept off of the friend that I referred to that was the prior Cornell coach, he said, there are some programs, some coaches, and some kids who that's what's the high school experience and this time is what's important to them. You can't just assume that every kid's going to want to necessarily run in college or run as a pro or whatever. They want to go all in now and then they're kind of move on in life. And so, yes, there's a certain thing that might be, what you perceive to be healthy, but you can't also assume that you may not have a kid that is just, that's, and if that's kind of decision they make or whatever, then it is what it is. But that's not the way that I was looking at it. And so I think some of those kids that you reference, um, maybe it's finding that right matrix. The the athlete that I was coaching that I had referenced earlier, the state champion kid, coming in, that was a his junior year that I coached him. Coming into his senior year, there weren't he was kind of cooked by the time we got to outdoor, and outdoor season didn't go as we would have liked. Um, After a pretty hard cross country and indoor season, it's really hard to go 3 seasons hard. And so I think it's benefit for those schools, particularly like in the West, or schools that choose to maybe not go big on indoor seasons and just focus on maybe just nationals or something like that.
Mhm.
And but for that kid, my biggest hope for him for the senior year kind of training window was going to be focusing on sleeping and eating. It didn't have to do
Mhm.
with volume. It didn't have to do with certain workouts. It was sleeping and eating to try to make him more consistent, more durable, have more energy, get sick less often.
That's
And
so
so I think,
important. I love that you say that because those that can translate into to so much. They can use that to translate into not just running, but other aspects of life, but also other aspects of their running at later years. Like I love that. I love that that's something that you that you focused on. But go on. Sorry, I get
yeah,
excited when you
no,
said
yeah.
that.
So it's, can you find things like that in these other athletes that have been broken? Can you look at their history and say, maybe this was a part of your experience and maybe you tried it and here we are, and maybe your body is just like, yo, like we can't do that anymore now. Not to say that maybe you can again later, but like that didn't really work, or you're in a different spot now. And so it's how do you figure out where those breakdown points were and how do you address those? And again, it may be outside of looking at a specific workout or volume or whatever. It's just where are they? Is it stress in life? Is it diet? Is it,
Mm,
whatever? But I think that that all plays into consistency and things like injury and incidents and stuff like that.
that was great. I think, and that kind of touched on my last question, which was about you know, those athletes that you see. And I wasn't even thinking of myself and my own experience, but it actually is just reminding me of it where, I ran at the collegiate level um, and, who I started with my freshman year, probably a third of us remained on the team when I graduated. Me being one of them, and I was, badly injured for over a year. And for a lot of them, understandably, classes and it's just, too much to try and juggle those things, or the pressure. But for some of them, they're like, it's just not, it wasn't fun anymore. And looking at like how to make sure that you're making it, you're always, you want the person to be better and whatever better is for them, but whether it's at a high school or college or as a a an adult or a just turned 50-year-old adult, me, how to keep it fun and to keep yourself, you know, improving and I don't even necessarily mean improving based on time, but improving in, where you're going out for a run or the things that you like to do or the pace or the, whatever. Like what things do you and I think you probably have said all of this, but do you think are important as a coach and as a parent to foster that love so that kids don't get to a point where they're like, ugh, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, totally.
Which
And maybe
okay
to
if they
answer
can,
some,
if they don't, but
yeah. Right. And so for you and I, we were competitive like in the background and both you just turned 50. Is that are
I
you
just did.
happy
Yeah,
50th or recent
thank
50th?
you.
So
Yes.
chances are, unless we do something out of the box, you and I are never going to, we could try all we want, but we're not going to come close to PRs or whatever. And so it's how do you,
I'm not going to break a
redefining,
5 minute mile. Only joking. I
no,
wasn't going to
yeah,
break a
not
5 minute mile in high school either. So,
Yeah. Right.
um,
So, how do you redefine the experience or metrics or whatever? And for some individuals or kids, it may even just be like maybe running isn't it right now, right? Find something else. Like you
mm,
like walk away from it, particularly when I talk to, maybe kids or young adults, if we're looking at what might be the like peak years, and that maybe keeps changing a little bit, and pushing back and some those individuals who may have been outside of the kind of peak fitness bell curve age or whatever. Now maybe that's a year later or 2 years later or whatever. So it's pushing back. But let's just say it's like, I don't know, around 36 years old or, whatever
Mm,
it is in there. If I'm talking to somebody who's even like out of college, just had a college career, feeling kind of cooked, maybe they're the athlete that is broken. Like you can take like the next 10 years off. Like just don't run a lick. I don't know, play
mm,
video games, become a chess master, find some other sport to engage in or whatever. And then you still got another, 5 years to rebuild yourself and still just be entering kind of like your peak window or whatever. So that's to
mm.
say, maybe sometimes it's just walk away from it a bit and find other things that bring you enjoyment,
Yeah.
just as much. And if it ends up being running again, that it comes back around, awesome. That's great. And maybe your body and mind and spirit will be in a different or a better place. Um, but it's really just making sure you are enjoying it and why are you doing this and what are you getting out of it? And is it occupying a positive space in your life or is it not? And if it's not, then
Mm.
hey, let's find something else that can, fill in that brings you just as much or if more enjoyment. And again, maybe you'll come back to it. Maybe you won't. Or and you'll have individuals like Gene Dykes. Gene Dykes, I love Gene Dykes, and I haven't talked to him probably in a year or so, and I know he was having some health issues that he was working through. But there's a perfect example of an individual who I think ran a little bit when he was young, not really competitively, got back into it when he was maybe in his
I don't know who that. Can
oh
you?
yeah, late
I'm
50s or
sorry.
something like that. And then or maybe it was even his 60s or something. But I think that um, he was crushing it. Like in set, he would come to. I think he came to Cayuga Trails a bunch of years, and it was like one of his favorite
Is he
races.
like 80 something and he still does all the crazy?
Crushing it. Yeah, I think I
Oh,
forget.
yeah, Gene. Okay, Gene. Total. I just
Yeah,
didn't recognize the last name. He runs. I've run with him numerous times at Notchview Ultra. He's like my favorite person in the world.
yeah, so
He's
wonderful, and
just
somebody that found it
so inspiring.
much
And
later in
he's
life.
just, yeah,
And so, that's again, you can put it to bed for a long time or not have found it, and suddenly you can be crushing it and having the time of your life with the community and destination races and improving and getting faster. And so it's speaks to, I guess, where we started on. So, finding the space where people are at in life and how to work with them where they are versus where maybe just want them to be or whatever.
yeah. Well, that's great. I hopefully maybe someday you'll move to Connecticut and come coach some of our kids. That would be
Yeah.
great.
Well, hopefully you said your career wise that maybe you'll get there, have the opportunity to. It sounds like something that would bring you some enjoyment. So hopefully you get there first.
Yes, I will hopefully I'm that crazy I'm that crazy person that runs around at all of my kids' meets and I cheer for
Yeah.
everybody. I cheer for every team and like you, like I people always be like, how do you know who that kid is? How do you know who that kid is? Are you related? Are you boys friends with them? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know their name and I'll, run around the
Cheer
course
for
and
'em.
cheer for them because
Yeah.
you just get so excited and um you just see people improve or you just see them enjoying yourself or even when you see that they're struggling and they keep going I it's inspiring to me and I it just brings so much joy for me that I'd love to go all over and cheer for them. So
Agreed.
well, so now your daughter are they finishing up their season? Are they
They have
where are
their
they at this point?
they have their conference meet this Saturday. And then they have their sectional race the following Thursday. The girls team is uh, pretty good this year, and hopefully will be even better next year. But they should qualify as a girls team for states, and then they'll go on to states, and then the week after states will be our combination um, Northeast
Oh, right.
regionals for Nike Nationals paired with our federation race. So that would be the one after. So there's still month or so of
Left.
season left for them for cross country.
And aren't there a couple big if I'm remembering correctly, some some like well-known courses out there, like 5K, that that I mean, I know Van Cortlandt, that's not in that part of New York, but I'm trying to remember that darn name of that. I
There's
feel like it's
at
two
least,
words, begins with an S,
hmm,
or it's but yeah, like there's right there are some like pretty legendary courses, 5K courses that a lot of big meets have been held on in that area, correct?
yeah, there's some long-standing races where you just referenced Van Cortlandt and where I referenced it earlier being down at Manhattan a couple weeks ago. I mean, that probably has some of the longest history there
Mm.
where you can still compare, runners, from the 70s or whatever on a pretty similar course. McQuaid is a big invite up in Rochester that they ran, which is a similar. I guess that's a difference now too, where there's just so many big invites that are just like thousands of runners and waves throughout the days and food trucks and that's definitely
Yeah,
more
and
of a thing than I
getting
be.
away from those dual meets and those, tri meets where it's just a couple teams. It seems
Yeah,
like that's getting
yeah, and I'm
away
not
from that more.
not opposed to them. I follow. I think I would agree with the concept of don't let racing get in the way of good training.
Mm.
Um, I feel like you can get a lot more out of a well-intentioned workout than in some cases racing. But I think there's also something lost in having kind of low-key opportunities where there's not as much pressure and where it's just a
Mhm.
dual meet or tri meet or whatever. Um, Whereas at least for the team here, they're pretty much just running like bigger invites at maybe some of the courses that you're thinking of.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah.
Well, I wish them well this weekend. I hope everything
Yeah,
goes
thanks.
great. You'll have to let me know how it goes, and this has been super helpful. And I think there's a lot of parallels that I think people can make, even from, what you're talking about and we were talking about, high schools and, marathon runners, and, keeping that fresh and exciting, and going out running with, a group of people, knowing that, some of them are really fast and some of them not so fast. And how do you, be able to have a little bit of a community feel to that run, or at least parts of it, where everybody can kind of, you know, socialize and be together for some of that. So I think there's a lot of takeaways that high schoolers and non-high schoolers and older people over 50 like myself
Yeah,
can
a
take.
lot of
So
commonalities.
yeah. So all right. Well, thank you so much. I
Yeah, thank you,
appreciate
Becky.
having you, and I look forward to when you'll be doing more coaching.
Cool.
So
Yeah,
even
sounds good.
more. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thank you. All
All
right.
right.
Bye
See ya.
bye.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Evil Becky Burke and Ian Golden. If you've made it this far, of course, seek professional help, and we will see you all in a mile and a half.